And with that, we'll get started. So this is session 3 out of the 4-part series on realizing the promise of the Earth Regeneration Fund. I want to welcome everyone once again. First 2 sessions were a lot of me talking and sharing a bunch of information, basically relating my narrative, my story, what I'm bringing to the group. And I look forward today to really starting to connect narratives, hearing more from the rest of you. And so I'm going to start just to get the juices flowing a little bit with a simple poll. In session 1, I introduced that framework of mapping what we call the Great Transition in 3 horizons and the 3 structural layers, and invited you to consider what sector of that 3x3 matrix, if you will, would you feel drawn. And so we'll just do a quick poll on that. The last time, the session 2 in particular, I shared too much information about the map, and it was probably too internally focused. It was a lot on how it works to try and illustrate why, what might be possible with the map. But before we jump into the discussion, I am going to do a quick reframing of the map. I got some feedback that people still felt like, I don't even know what this thing is now. I'm more confused than ever, maybe. So I'm going to try and reduce the confusion and give you a few more handles on the narrative that you can grab onto, that you can connect your narrative to. So that's going to, sort of look at the map more from the perspective of what can you really do with it? Why is it there? But then the bulk of the meeting today is going to be an open discussion. I want to hear from you. I'm suggesting 3 questions. Of course, people will take it where they feel compelled to take it, and that's good too. But to bring some structure and to sort of catalyze the conversation, I'm going to ask you to reflect on what narrative you're bringing to this tapestry, what role you envision yourself playing in bioregional storytelling, and then what connections or questions or possibilities did sessions 1 and 2 spark for you? And that's where I think we can begin to connect. And then I'm going to take a few minutes at the end to talk about what's coming up in session 4. That's where things get real. That's where it's less talk and more action. So sound good? If remember, you're all on mute, so you can give a thumbs up, but if you want to give a verbal feedback, you'll have to go off mute to ask any questions about the agenda or any suggestions. But I think I will just jump right into this, which is the poll. And so the poll is asking, this is a slide that I shared in session 1, where we talked about the 3 horizons of change and the 3 structural layers of cultural evolution. And so what I've done here is I've just put some labels on them. This is all about the transition, what we call the Great Transition in session 1, from the material culture, the memes of material culture, which is we identified as being sort of a deep root cause of the meta crisis, are the memes of separation, domination, and exploitation. Our whole culture is built on those assumptions. But a new culture is emerging. The planet, what we call the planetary culture, it goes by other names, but I'm going to use that name for today. That's rooted not in separation, but in interconnection or unity, and not in domination, but partnership, and not in exploitation, but reverence. And so then we looked at how that great transition might unfold in 3 horizons and the 3 structural layers. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to just feel into where you're drawn, what part of this 3x3 matrix, if you will, that I've labeled H1SS, H1S, and H1I, and so forth. I put labels on it just for convenience. And I'm going to see if I can turn on the poll while I'm sharing. Let's see. Yeah. So here's a quick poll. Are you seeing, give me a thumbs up if anybody's seeing the poll. That's the first time I've actually tried to do a poll. All right, awesome, it's working. So I'll just give you a minute or two to just sort of feel out where you're drawn. And as I noted, when action is needed in all three layers and in all three horizons. So it's all hands on deck, right? So feel free to select more than one option as well. You can select as many as you want. The more you select, maybe the less you'll be able to focus on your role. So I invite some discernment in there, but I also don't want to try and paint you into a box. So we'll take about one more minute.
Steve, I think I would have clicked a few different options. I didn't realize, so I submitted it after one option.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right. It's mostly for self-reflection and to provoke your own thinking. So even if you didn't fully fill out the poll in that way, I hope it did allow you to re-engage and reawaken that parts of you and just kind of reacquaint yourself with where you feel drawn. All right. We're getting up there. We have about 6 more people, but it's an optional poll, so 10 seconds. I'm not sure if you're able to see the intermediate results. Maybe that's just me that can see that.
I think it's you.
Okay. I'm going to end the poll and hopefully that'll allow us to all see it. But I will tell you that the area that's getting the greatest attention is H3 superstructure, sort of the upper right, worldview, values, ideologies, beliefs, cultural narratives in Horizon 3. And the next most is Horizon 3 structure, followed by Horizon 3 infrastructure. But we do have votes in all sectors, so that's good. We've got at least some coverage in all sectors. So I'll share the results. Let's see what it shows. Okay. Now are you seeing it? Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for playing along with that. It should be part of the recording of this. I'll publish the results when we record the session. But so Horizon 1 seemed to get like about 8 votes, and Horizon 2 looks like about 24, and Horizon 3 29, 36 if my math is right. And on the infrastructure front, we have 9, 17, 21 on infrastructure, 12, 21 on structure, and 3, 11, 28 on superstructure. All right, cool. So, as I mentioned last time, I gave a lot of information on the internals, but I'm trying to reflect here, give you a different way of framing what is the map. And so in this framing, what I'm suggesting is the map is offering a coherent tech ecosystem that brings coherence and agency to bioregional stories. So we'll start with the bioregion, and this is actually also works at different scales. So it could be at a watershed scale, an eco-regional scale, and landscape scale. But if we think about the stories we're telling, right, and many people on this call know much better than I. So this is part of the advantage of the map is that I don't need to be the expert because I have the experts that can put their own stories in the map. But what I'm trying to convey here is a sense of the diversity of the elements that make up a bioregional story. There's the cultural aspects of the story, including the history and the indigenous presence. There's the geological aspects and biological, and for that matter, other scientific stories, hydrological, meteorological. There's measurement, reporting, and validation systems or verification systems, sensor systems, right, that are contributing to part of the story that might be bringing both historical and real-time data about the bioregion. And I've included art in here just to clarify that these are not just verbal stories. This is not just language. It could be artistic media that also is an integral part of telling a bioregional stories. And then there's the aspirational aspects of a bioregion. What's its vision? What are its goals? What values and principles does it aspire to? And what models seem to make sense? What is the governance model that fits for this watershed or landscape or ecoregion? Notions of currency, different concepts of what currency other than just debt-backed positive interest rate national currencies, different economic models, different education models, different agricultural models, energy models, and so forth. Those could also be part of the bioregional story that we're trying to tell. And then who's involved in this story? We've got projects, we've got people. They're organized into groups at different scales, perhaps fractally organized. And if we can organize at human scale, that means we can build networks of trust, networks rooted in actual personal relationships, knowing one another and scaling those. And we also have talked about how there's a biological commons, which is an aspect of the bioregion, and also information commons are an aspect of the bioregion. So these are all different dimensions, different elements that make up the bioregional story. And so the map, this coherent tech ecosystem, attempts to bring extensibility so that the flexibility that you can actually represent the diversity of these elements without the consolidation, the domination of a more and more powerful tech platform that's locking you in, that's basically capturing you and giving you high switching costs. And it does that. This is where we talked a little bit about holons and holon relationships, because everything you see here is a holon. And if you don't see a critical element of the story, and I'm sure I'm leaving important things out, you can add your own, you can define your own holons, you can define new kinds of information into the map. The map also hopes to reduce the integration burden, keeping track of 5, 10, 20 technologies, synchronizing data between them, support, licenses, ... Let's simplify that. The map supports self-selected culture, self-selected governance, self-selected protocols. So we can tell these stories in such a way that then flow funders can help tell a compelling story, that it can attract dollars from the current economy and bring them to feed, to nurture our ecosystem, right? Where they can serve as compost into the bioregion. So a lot of the, like the concept of a bioregional funding facility, or just the Earth Regeneration Fund itself, includes this notion of attracting flow funders that are composting dollars to nurture this network. But there's another part of a bioregional story, and that's the story of extraction, right? That's been the dominant story, how much extraction is happening. And so if we don't have ways of capturing flow in a self-sufficient way within the bioregion, then we're constantly relying on just the external economy. It's still running, it's still cranking away, it's still extracting, it's still exploiting, right? And then we siphon off a subset of that into the bioregion. But what we need to start is developing the capacity within the bioregion to support multidimensional resource flows that are layered on and integrated with biological flows. Does that make sense? And to do that, we need a much richer sense of definition of value. It's not just money, right? So we've talked about the multidimensional aspects of value. So that allows flow funders to direct the money into regenerative flows. But the other thing that the map tries to bring is this notion of membranes, because sovereignty is so critical to this story, right? We need to have self-empowerment, self-sovereignty at all scales here if we're going to resist the extraction and the exploitation from the current economy. And so the map tries to bring a coherent tech ecosystem that can reduce this extraction by increasing the self-sufficiency of a bioregion or a watershed or a landscape or an ecoregion, and do so in a way that resists capture itself. And so it resists it by partially by having these self-sufficient flows, by building this on networks of trust at human scale, human relationships, by being able to track provenance, resource provenance, to know where it came from and what was involved in the production or the story, the origin story, really, and everything along the supply chain, if you will. And it also resists capture through commons, right? Managed commons, managed by the stakeholders of the commons itself. So this is a different framing of the map. I hope this helps sort of recap what we talked about last time, but in a way that maybe allows you to connect yourself in the story. So that's what I want to do next, is just sort of open up the discussion, but maybe you can, just feel into this picture for a moment, and like we did with the last picture, feel, where are you drawn? Sort of what part of the bioregional storytelling do you feel drawn towards, right? What's attracting you? What's your role in this milieu? And with that, I'll stop sharing and just open it up for some connecting narratives. So, invite you to tell us what narrative you're bringing to the tapestry and what role you envision yourself playing in bioregional storytelling. And then also, any questions or connections that you saw, or possibilities that sparked in you from session 1 or session 2, or just that recap I just did. All right, we have some hands going up. And remember, you will need to unmute. Pat.
I may have a simplistic response, but I keep seeing this story that you created, just recreating again now, reframing it as an indigenous story. And that when you talk about boundaries, so that we are not, so we have all the personal internal governance and control of our lives and of our relationships. I keep thinking, from what I know, particularly about indigenous people in California, that this is the kind of life, way of living and relating and finding necessary flows. This is how things were then, before the coming of the European dominance. So that's, I guess, my focus is really in that section of the horizons, where I'm looking at a connection to what can I learn and what can I use as from the indigenous model.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this makes any sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. I mean, as I think we talked in the previous session, I can't remember if it was one or two, just about the 5,000-year detour that civilization has taken down the means of separation and domination and exploitation. And indigenous cultures largely avoided that detour. And so there's, we're remembering indigenous lifeways. So it's very critical that we, get access to that.
Can I make one more comment about that?
Please, yeah.
I was taken with your background, with your systems background, your how you worked at the level of architecture. And a good friend of mine who was my manager when I was at Fireman's Fund Insurance Company in systems for 23 years. I sent your previous videos, of what we've been doing together. And I was surprised by his, he's from back east. I was surprised by his response, and he thought it was kind of, in a way, a lot of baloney, because what he brought in was the warfare, which he saw, the warring between different tribes. And I don't, I haven't been focusing on that. And but certainly in California, from what I understand, different tribes in California manage to live and trade and deal with the needs from the land without a lot of inner warfare. So I don't know how to respond to that. To me, it says, okay, if there was some people were more, into a warfare kind of response than others. The main thing was, what was their relationship to the land, and how did they hold the land, and and because they lived off of it directly, I felt they developed more of a spiritual relationship and knew how to care for it. And that, to me, was something I want to learn from them. So anyway, that seemed to be a problem. I was really surprised that there was such a focus for him on warfare. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think it's easy to over-romanticize and oversimplify, rich cultural histories, lumping everything under indigenous is just like a gross oversimplification. And it's not to say that there wasn't conflict in the past. And I certainly don't consider myself an expert in this, but I think there's a substantial amount of documentation. I mean, I'll cite, since Roger's on the call here, I'll cite his book. There's others that he cites in that book that give a lot of credence to the evolutionary stages that were discussed there, and the shift in means. And so, yes, there are. It's a more complicated story than that, but by and large, I think those mimetic shifts are well substantiated. Yeah, but thanks for bringing that in. Michael, I think you're up next. Jan, actually, before you go, Michael, let me just quickly check with Jan. I know, Jan, it sounds like you need to drop. Perhaps you already have dropped, but if not, if there was a comment you wanted to make before you left, you're welcome to jump in.
Looks like he's gone.
Okay. Michael, welcome.
Fabulous. Steve, thank you so much. I've watched both previous recordings. I love the way you build your slides. It's a very nice way to convey some very complex ideas. For those who I don't know on the call, I also have an enterprise architect background from many, many years ago. I haven't been involved for a long, long time. And I can confirm that Steve was not pulling the wool over your eyes regarding the development of the space. He nailed it, in my opinion. Now, Steve, your invitation was for us to bring our own narrative, which I don't want to do now. I'd like to come in later after maybe hearing everybody else's. But I have a simple question, which has to do with the framing of how you've presented the platform. So it's under the banner of realizing the promise of the Earth Regen Fund, which I get completely because of this audience. And there's a much wider application. Pretty much anybody working in the regen space outside of this initiative here. I'm just curious about whether there was a specific reason why you chose to land here, or did that just evolve? If there's no specific reason, that's perfectly okay. I was just a little confused by that.
Right. Yeah, no, great question. To answer it a couple of ways. One is that as I've struggled to tell the story of the map, because it is so extensible and open-ended, it's like this amorphous thing that's hard to really pin down what it is. And as soon as I say, well, it can do this, then there's tendency to say, oh, that's all it does. Oh, that's what it is. Now I've labeled it. I can categorize it. I know what it is, right? And so I'm looking for different ways to tell the story. The second is I'm specifically inspired by the bioregional design pathway that Joe Brewer has laid out. It feels really spot on to me, well thought out, coherent. It has multiple elements that are woven together in a way that I think is mutually reinforcing and really powerful. And so that's drawn me to the design school in particular. And the Earth Regeneration Fund, my understanding is going to be a major focus of 2025, in the same way that building bioregional learning centers was the focus in 2024. And so I wanted to position this directly in support of that effort. Not to say that the map is not broadly usable in many other contexts or through other lenses, but I wanted to bring attention to that lens, and also just share, and I'll talk about this more in session 4, that there is a variety of different directions I could go with map development. There's different features we can prioritize to develop first, right? So I'm going to be prioritizing the development of map features to support this story. And so that's the other reason I wanted to make that connection. Cool. Melanie.
Thank you. It's been a very interesting morning, and I'm really glad to be here. And I trust that when things come up, there's something there. This map's come up in our own conversations internally at the Pivot as just being brilliant. So thank you so much, Steve. And thank you in so many ways. You've touched my life more than you know. Where I'm very curious is so many of us are following in Bucky's call out to us to build a new world to make the old world obsolete. We have vested ourselves in important and critical ways. But in a full spectrum response, and especially also as my background as a healthcare provider and in biology, physiology, an organism under attack creates a hypervigilant immune response that cannot be underestimated. And in an indigenous world where we're now finally shining the lens back on what really happened, we can deeply see and feel that the active suppression, I see her in Horizon 1, H1, that progress through economic growth narrative dominates. I would propose that if you were looking at it through an indigenous lens, a nature-based worldview lens, it's more than progress, it's domination, true domination. And what came across my lens this morning is an extraordinary talk, 6 months old now, that's part of the forming narrative around health. and how we manage healthcare and freedom of choice around health, which extends to freedom of choice around food and how we manage soil, that the level of collusion is extraordinary, to the level that I think and I certainly am, I don't want to spend too much time thinking about that because I'm too busy building the new and focusing on the new. But unless we actively cultivate brothers and sisters who are deeply working at the level that it's being put out to suppress this, I don't think we're giving due credit to where these many, many, many years of domination have actually had a deep taproot. And just building a new system without actually excavating and bringing up to light the fundamental misperceptions that allowed this system to live so long, we're going to be compromised. And I can tell you, it landed in my solar plexus this morning. It was like hard to breathe. If anyone's interested to listen to the podcast I listen to, and I know a lot about this stuff, and it's only conspiracy until it's true. This stuff is now verifiable in light. Unless we have at the constitutional level, and I don't even know if that's the right word because it's so loaded, but fundamental agreements that we have the right to choose and that there's governance that allows that, there is the real possibility that all of our efforts become again suppressed, and it just takes a lot longer. And I don't know how much longer we have. So I just want to throw that out there, that the Horizon 1, which I am loath sometimes to really step into, and I feel so, I think they've created it this way. I don't have much power around, but collectively we can do that. So I think that's a really important thing to keep holding on to and looking at and bringing to light. And that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure others may have perspectives to offer on that, but thank you for bringing that in. There's several things I'd like to respond to in what you brought up. One is the hypervigilant immune response. Immune systems need to recognize threats in order to respond. One of the things I believe we have going for us, and this was part of the exchange that Michael and I had in the conversations on Mighty Network, but the Horizon 3 models that we're building don't make sense to Horizon 1, and therefore are not seen as threats by many. The fact that we're not playing the game, we're not in the game theoretic finite game of competition, makes us non-players from their perspective, and therefore unimportant, right? And safely ignored. The second thing I'd want to respond to is the pervasiveness of the domination being underrepresented, and the fact that we really, really need to recognize how pervasive it is. And that's part of the reason why on the Planet Project, we look to these deep mimetic structures, these deep hidden assumptions for root cause. Because if we don't root those out, and you talked about excavating that, we need to excavate that in our own consciousness first, right? What are my colonial attitudes? How am I, playing in the domination meme? How am I reinforcing the separation meme? How am I exploiting, right? And then be vigilant with each other in self-organizing groups to be constantly vigilant for that. So those are important aspects. Also, a powerful counter strategy, though, to that domination is to do the self-organization, right? We're not going to change. I don't think we're going to get the level of change we need by trying to change the Constitution or the government or electing new leaders. The game is fixed, and playing the game, we're not going to play it anywhere near as well as the dominant players that have the asymmetric power. what we're trying to do is create the new game. And so I think a decentralized strategy, I think a bottom-up strategy that's grounded in the soil and in the health of living systems, and in building trust on a person-to-person level, and then finding ways to scaffold that trust is part of the answer. And finally, we need to be thinking consciously about the immune system of the new models. What is our immune system? That's how life deals with threats, right? Living systems encounter threats all the time, and they've developed robust immune systems. So I think we have a lot to learn from immune systems of living systems to inform the design of the new civilization that we're building in Horizon 3.
Thank you, Steve. I love that. And I know how dedicated you are to those structures. I just have to tell you, there's still something swimming around my solar plexus on this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
yeah, I feel that, and it's I I vacillate a lot between heartbreak and inspiration, because it's just hard to look at.
yeah, for sure.
It's hard to look at the magnitude of what we're up against and not just be floored sometimes. But thankfully, we're all here together.
Yeah, for sure.
To hold that grief collectively, and to inspire each other when each of us are feeling overwhelmed by the negative power of that story. We can lift each other up, is my hope. Simon, welcome, friend.
Thanks. Thank you. I was just reflecting on the diagram and, the interaction between the bioregional stuff and the current economy. And I was thinking, well, maybe there are some things, the flow from the current economy doesn't need to be restricted to, well, I don't know what's included in the idea of composting existing resources, but to me, there are things that we can offer, whether that be services, or most likely services maybe, but perhaps also, organically grown vegetables and things, which are actually valued in the current economy by people that maybe are still stuck in the current economy, but have values closer to ours. And I wondered if there's room in that diagram to have a kind of another arrow there, which where we're actually participating from the membrane, not kind of as individuals, but from as a system, where we're participating, we're kind of like having a balance of trade, if you like, with the current economy. Because that's something that I would certainly be interested in doing, and also my own work has got that aspect to it. And maybe you could see this as Horizon 2 stuff. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. I think flows between the bioregional economy and the current economy can happen and should happen. It's important to have the membrane enforcement, however, right? I had a moment that I was reminded of when Melanie was speaking, where I saw presentation of what I saw was a marketing engine, greenwashing engine, that had all of the right language, that had all of the right stories to tell about, we're helping to give life to the regenerative economy. We're doing that via co-op of corporations that are in a marketing agreement, so that if you go do something in the regenerative economy, we'll give you a gift card to buy something in this economy. Well, or in the co-op that is supporting the economy. And I just was suddenly struck by, oh, wow, this is actually the way the regenerative movement can get co-opted. This is a pretty brilliant capture strategy, right? So again, that's part of the vigilance of recognizing, how does that happening? Like, if it takes $5 in the consumptive economy to generate a 50-cent donation stream into the regenerative economy, then the only way that grows is to grow the the current economy, right? The exploitative economy. And I've seen many little, many schemes like that. So I think we need to be vigilant about those kinds of things. But to offer healthy food, healthy, grounded things created out of a regenerative economy to others is fantastic and necessary.
Yeah.
It's a way we grow the
Right.
regenerative economy. So yeah.
Yeah, I
right
just
on.
like to see it in the diagram as well. Just that'd be nice.
Well, I left what I called the extraction arrow, but I tried to leave that as, if you look at the diagram, there's a flow in both directions. I didn't erase it. I just moved it out to the membrane level. If you that was
Very cool.
a subtlety I didn't talk about, but yeah. So I can't just come in and violate the agreements of the commons and violate the agreements within the membrane, basically. Yeah. Thank you for that. Stephen.
Oh my God, there's so much I want to say after hearing all these people go. We'll see how well I do. I made a few notes. And I'll try to weave them together coherently. One thing that comes up repeatedly, and Melanie, a bunch of this was triggered by what you were saying. In the transition from Horizon 1 to Horizon 3, I think it's really important, in my opinion, for people to recognize a large portion of humanity is not going to make the transition to Horizon 3. Right? So I heard, I don't know if it was there for you, Melanie, but I know I heard we've got to take care of everybody and make sure everybody makes it through. And what can we do to nurture all these people? I know that comes up for me, or it's hidden in my shadow. So I hear it when people express concerns and it might not be theirs. Because that requires us a whole amount of emotional community support and grieving to realize that not just species, but humans will die in this transition just because we can't do it all. We won't do it all in time. But to me, that's what appealed with Joe as I learned about his teachings in the whole design pathway, is recognizing that those communities that can come together and use this mapping to find each other and first and foremost support those who already see and not worry about trying to convert those who don't see. Right? There's so much. I see someone there in Tobias's window jumping up and down. I've so wanted to be converting people. And now I realize my role is the ferryman, those who are ready to get on the boat, help them cross the river. So that's my thing about that. All right, I'll jump to this one. I don't know what happened to Jeff McNeely. I so wish he was here because it was just brought up by Simon. And I don't know, Steve, how much you and Jeff have been talking, but Jeff has got this whole vision for an economic paradigm he calls economics, using the principles of Aikido to take the destructive energy of current capitalism and use it to our advantage. Yeah. And,
Yeah, I did get a chance to. I wasn't able to attend, but I did watch the recording of that, and then Jeff and I had like an hour-long conversation just
Okay.
3 days back. So yeah,
Good.
we're connected.
But that part of his ideas are to address this issue of how do we interact, how do we create our own regenerative economy and interact with extractive economies, and how do we do that with integrity, and what is integrity for different communities who might do that? And he's got all the resources from his other people he knows, so he could speak more to it. I'm just trying to learn to think enough about it, let alone remember the names of the other groups he's worked with. But I think that's something we'll hear more about that as Jeff does more in the design school with economics. And I think that sort of idea will be very important in the process. And then mentioning the changes back to the not all will make it. Steve, you hit on something pretty important, I think, with as far as saying, I don't think we could change the Constitution, or I heard it as I don't think we could change, a change to the US Constitution is not going to help if we could even do that. And I think that again points to not all can make it. It's like so many people are in the major system, and I've joined a constitution, I don't know what to call it accurately, a constitutional freedom group, and they are like looking at what the Constitution says and how It's been the way the government runs is not consistent with that. So these people who really want the freedom to do things like conduct their own business without the government interfering, things like raw milk, a lot of the issues that are the regenerative issues. And from where I sit, those freedom groups, a lot of them are still very individualistic, like essentially I'm free to pollute my land, screw you downstream. We don't need no EPA. But I think we can't let that attitude stop the support that those people need to break down the barriers and the obstruction that the federal system is, the centralized system is. The thing is, those are people who are really aligned with us. We just need to bring them further into the fold for those who think that whatever they do on their property doesn't matter because they don't have a bioregional view yet. And for me, it's always what are people's self-interest and how are my self-interests aligned with yours? And where do we find that common ground? And then Gaia, nature, God, whatever universe takes over the rest to bring us together for forwarding the cause. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen.
Soapbox down.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. It is hard to recognize that not everybody's going to make it through, but I probably would frame it a little differently. Horizon 3 is I think I would say not everybody is going to make it into planetary culture. Horizon 3 work by its nature tends to be fringe, and the idea isn't to get everybody into Horizon 3. The idea is to try and create the civilization in which flourishing Earth is possible. And so I think a lot of what we're faced with right now is lack of imagination, lack of awareness. Like for the vast majority of people, it doesn't say that any alternative is possible, and therefore it doesn't even cross their mind that there's an alternative. So those working in Horizon 3 can help. It's like the innovation curve, right? We've got the early adopters, and then the next group of awareness gets attracted. They couldn't do it at first, but then they're attracted. And then people see their neighbors do it, and their friends do it, and their colleagues do it. Then more people do it, right? So I think we are trying to grow planetary culture.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it too. Rather, well, it's going to get less rejection than saying you ain't all going to make it. It's like not everyone will think this way. That's fine. We can live side by side. How do we live side?
Yeah, I think we need to be careful of the sort of the rapture dynamic, right? Those of us on Horizon 3 are we're building the Ark. We'll make sure on the Ark, right? All the rest of you.
Thank you. The rapture dynamic. That totally helps me see that differently.
Yeah. So I mean, this is an invitation. The whole idea is a world that works for all, right? So the invitation is for all to help co-create this world. But we're dealing with sort of Overton window dynamics, right? Where we can't even talk about the kinds of constitutional changes that would really make a difference now because we're too deep in the system. That day may come, and I'm not ruling out the possibility of a new constitution at all. But I just think that our capacity to change the Constitution or effect change in a top-down way right now is running just headlong against those that hypervigilant immune response that is so good at putting down all those sorts of movements. So I'm just skeptical about that. But if those see a way to path to do it, then I honor that too. Go for it. Tobias.
Hello, thank you, everyone. I just wanted to mention something about this transitioning that I haven't heard today, but I think it was Pat's comments about what indigenous people think and say about the land, and it's the transition about ownership, about land, right? Like we think we had the right to own of that. I mean, neither us. It's for me, like the main selling point here will be on buying land. Just give land back to herself, to Gaia. So, and I think it's the plexus also that was activating there about the Constitution. Should we change that? Why not just play with that? Like, there are people in the state playing with religions, right? So it's and I think it was you, Steve, that mentioned about the bringing some creativity to the table as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I'm connecting more from the heart, and that's probably why it's very difficult to explain and bring logic to this. But it's connecting back to oneness, like forgive about ourselves, our right to take decisions on the land, just go transition to stewardships. I haven't heard maybe right, like we know it all. So yeah, that's mainly it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing your heart to this conversation. That's at the root of what we need to do. So I so appreciate that. Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, stewardship, the transition from ownership to stewardship is essential. I think it's implicit in the move to commons, but we hadn't named that. So thank you for naming that. But that changes the relationship. And yeah, I think the oneness, that is, we sometimes use the term interconnection when we're talking about planetary culture, but we also use the term unity and oneness, right? Those are just sort of different faces of that, right? Recognizing the fundamentally interconnected, interdependent, interrelated nature of reality. And through that lens, we're all one, right? We're all one. And when we are all one, then to carve it up into owner pieces just is reintroducing that separation meme, right? It's reintroducing the separation paradigm. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in as well. Yeah. Oh, the final thing reaction I had in what you said is, yes, we need evolutionary experiments, right? We're playing around in this space, right? We've had 5,000 years to do the material culture game, right? And we're just emerging in the planetary culture game, and lots of experiments in governance, in concepts of money, in how we do an economy, how we do agriculture, right? We have lots of brilliant thinkers with some wonderful ideas. Let's put them in practice, see what works, and let's replicate those that work and learn from each other. So yeah, evolutionary experiments is huge.
And just one that thing that I forgot to mention, that you said before about how to recognize separation, domination, and exploitation, not only into the rulers of the world right now, but also in ourselves. I will also call it out to look for fear, where the fear is, because there is a lot of people taking decisions from fear. And that's also what's degenerating at all. That's also what is harming so many things, right? And also in ourselves, like, why don't we take the risks? Like, I've been living in nature the last 2 years and a half in communities in Portugal after doing crazy crypto work around, and then I was like, fuck this is all bullshit. Like, there was this refi movement that brought me attention into nature and to the reality behind communities there living, sharing, opening spaces together, and bringing the devotion to themselves and to the land, and having that experience. And of course, I didn't do that before, because I was afraid of so many things, but I didn't realize, I didn't know that. So when we are calling out this evilness around, I will also recommend to bring that in the narrative, because that makes us go deeper.
Yeah, totally. That's something I'll quickly respond to that, and then we have several people queued up, so I'll keep it short. But yeah, that whole shift from fear to love, from acting out of avoidance of something bad versus being pulled towards what could be, that whole aspirational pull, that's a key shift that I'm practicing that myself. I still tend to get caught up in the language of the meta crisis and everything's breaking down and collapse, and because it's true, that's also true, right? But it's not, then we're just acting in fear of avoiding that. When I imagine the kind of world we could have when our economic system and our agriculture system and our education system and so forth are all expressions of love, oneness, reverence for all that is, for all life and partnership. And we haven't tried that at scale with the technological capacities we have now. So just imagine that, and let's work towards that, right? Let's rock on that. Yeah, man. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. You're very good at talking about this. I wanted to just kind of come back what Melanie brought in, and then the conversation that's gone since then. Is I was thinking language and the way that we talk is sometimes so inadequate for talking about really complex, like deeply complex systems. And I just sometimes worth going into a little bit of the detail to even see what we're talking, like the storytelling, because stories, I think, is where you can start to hold some of that complexity. But fighting the existing system, there's a bit of a cardboard cutout of what it is and what we're seeing, because you've got it, like by the time it becomes a pattern, you've kind of reduced it to, like, you're not seeing the granular detail. But I'm thinking about friends of mine who are, deeply involved in, I don't know, the ancient forest, like the cutting down of the forests here. That's a really big issue. A ton of protests, a ton of like all sorts of creative actions. There's the Palestinian, what's going on there, and so my friends that are involved in sort of really rigorously staying attuned to what's happening, all of the films, sort of lots of action that they're coordinating in our community. But my supporting them, having conversations about what they're doing, I really trust some of them and their ability to sense make into that. So getting a sense of the deeper system and understanding what you were talking about, Melanie, when you were seeing the video, is sort of getting in behind the details of what's going on. And so that sense making, there's something about sharpening our own skills to be able to just pay attention to that granular detail of what's going on, so that we're not blind to sort of a fuzziness that it can kind of become. And I think that those skills are really critical as we're going forward. So there's, like, it's just not linear. We've actually got to engage in the system that's deteriorating, that is falling apart, because it also creates the bridges in relationships into where we're needing to go. And they may have their own trauma, their own reasons why they're actually not working in Horizon 3. But they've still got, there's that human relationship piece that is critical. And there's also this ability for people to heal, to hear, like to bridge to. So anyway, all I wanted to do was speak to that it can become something that's less than representative of the deep complexity of what we're dealing with when we're trying to talk about it. But those relationships but staying sharp to the issues is critical to how we're navigating into the future.
Yeah. As usual, Claire, that's so beautiful and important part. Thank you for bringing that into our narrative. Excuse me. Yeah, I like what you said about being wary of turning the current system into a cardboard cutout. of oversimplifying the narrative and reducing it, right? And I was really struck, you know, I had in the picture, I showed the current economy as this gray monolith, right? And of course, it's a very rich thing. But what I was struck by in that reflection was to avoid equating the people with the system. The people that are operating in the current economy are not the current, they're not the memes of the current economy. They're human beings. They're complex, multidimensional human beings, just like you and I, right? And so the fact that they're playing in that game, they shouldn't be lumped into some category as a result of that. So I think you're inviting us to stay open to the complexity and richness of human relationships and human systems and living systems, the complexity. And I'll also just put a shout out for the design. This is maybe in response to the very first question Michael Haupt asked about why the focus on Earth Regeneration Fund. One of the reasons I so appreciate the design school is the inner space, the recognition of the importance of exploring. You know, we need to be able, for example, to have the emotional capacity to hold all the heartbreak and hold the possibilities as well as the breakdowns, and recognize what triggers, what buttons I'm getting are firing for me as a result of my trauma, and heal that so that I can have a healthier response to hold it all. And so I can have a response that's rooted in love, that's rooted in wisdom, and not in fear and reactivity. So yeah, thank you once again for bringing that in. Carrie.
Thank you, Steve. I was going to try not to say anything because I learned so much more when I'm listening. But first of all, I just want to thank you for sharing your vision with us. I confess that, you know, it was well above my pay grade to like be able to hold the level of detail that you went into with us. I'm saying that sort of in jest because I got the big picture and I don't really need to know the details, right? Like you've got that covered. So I'm really grateful that you went to the trouble of going into that detail for us because it really helps us understand and see you and the level and depth of your heart and your desire to help us all liberate ourselves. So much gratitude. And I wanted to build, you know, on what a lot of what has been said, but in particular Claire's shared just now, which is, I mean, this is what really incited me to contribute today. The question, first of all, the good news is we don't all need to go to Horizon 3 to exercise positive tipping points. So that's, I think we only need, somebody might know the math better, but I think we only need 20% of us to act in service to life for the energy to really be moving in that direction. So that's the good news. But really importantly, one of the things I think is missing from these global conversations is, and I'm trying to watch my own language around this. This is a really important practice that I'm committing to, is to not use futuristic language, because the reality is that, as Claire stated so beautifully, like it's uneven. The pain is already here. Like the system is already, you know, quote unquote, collapsing in some places, and it has been for a while. The collapse is not evenly distributed, but to talk about it in future tense, I think, you know, doesn't serve us, because there is so much grief and destruction and death already happening, and so much more to come in Horizon 1 that is not being centered in the conversations, right? Like, you know, the people in India and Bangladesh and even for that matter in Valencia or in Asheville, you know, don't necessarily have the privilege of so much thinking about Horizon 1, or the people who are on boats, you know, trying to cross the Mediterranean, or the people who are in a war zone, you know, like these things are happening now. Some of them are climate related, others of them are not. But the climate related catastrophes of, on human and other species life is already very well underway. So in some sense, as I think about, where I'm just, where my own heart and skills and whatever are best placed other than bioregionally, I think also I'm trying to, there's a tendency for all of us to think that we need to be everywhere at once. And I don't think, and I think we have to cut ourselves some slack. But I do think that if we were to, this is something I'm just iterating and, playing around in my own head. It's like, what if we were to center those, what if we really were to mobilize the principles of Ubuntu in these exercises? And I think you've started to do that with this platform. And so, but what if our own hearts and our own inner work were devoted more to that exercise? Might that lead us to transformation more quickly? So that's something I've been playing around with a lot. And I invite you all to watch the videos and podcasts from the Club of Rome on this from a couple of years ago, and pay special attention to the work of Jayati Ghosh, who's been calling for this at the global level. So thank you. That's my creed.
Thank you, Claire. And I might ask that you
Carrie.
include the links to that.
Yeah, it's Carrie. My name's Carrie.
Did I not say Carrie?
Yeah, you said Claire. It's okay. Claire went right before me.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry. Thank you for calling me on it. I knew it was you, Carrie. I recognize you. I think I just saw the participant name and it just threw me off. Yes, Carrie. If you could put the links that you mentioned to the Club of Rome talks and that you just cited, then that'd be great. We'll make sure those get included in the notes in the recording for this meeting. Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying about not using the future tense. I was rightly called on that in the first session when I used the terminology, avoiding civilizational collapse requires that we do X, right? And it was pointed out we're already in collapse. So I think yeah, I appreciate that reminder, and I'm still learning myself how to be careful of my use of language. I'd also say it's important to avoid it this is why in talking about the three horizons, it's important to talk about not using future tense when talking about creating the new models, when we're talking about
absolutely
Horizon 3. The Horizon 3 work is urgently needed right now, not sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just one more quick thing about, I mean, we're all learning to not speak in future tense, right? So it's not a criticism, but, oh, I forgot my train of thought. If I think of it, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Well, thanks for the reminder. And yeah, I appreciate being corrected whenever I'm misspeaking too, because we're all just kind of learning through this together. David.
Yeah, just following on from what Carrie was saying, I've been thinking a lot lately about the parallels between the collapse of medieval European civilization and our current predicament. And, that's like 500 years ago, with the collapse of feudalism, of the governance systems, the collapse of the hegemony of the Catholic Church, all these threats, which led to not only the Inquisition and colonialism, but then led to the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the modernity that we're now witnessing the end of, the collapse of that era. And then thinking underlying that was this idea of the great chain of being that you referred to 5,000 years ago, the idea of separability, stemming way back to Hammurabi and promoting his god that ended up being a supreme being, and how he could then be the supreme king, and then leading up through to Plato and Aristotle and their concepts of human exceptionalism, and then leading up through that being adopted by the church, which became embedded in all our institutions, the ideology, the idea of human supremacy, which has led us to our current predicament. And then contrasting that with the indigenous governance model of Bimajuan in this part of the world, which is being on a good path of balance, and not dissimilar from Hinduism and Buddhism, the idea that everything is in a circle, and so that there is no concept of hierarchy. There is no concept of separability. That is not even possible. So these are things that are going through my mind. And also I'm coming to see the importance, the necessity of actual indigenous governance, rather than, not indigenous like governance, but actual indigenous governance of the Council of the Grandmothers, the clan mothers, the necessity of using traditional knowledge to guide our decision making. And I'm thinking of enoughness as an economic model that was promoted by Rebecca Adamson a few years ago, which is like decentralized decision making for the benefit of the whole. And she references Visa as an example of that very concept of total decentralized participation, and for the benefit of the whole, rather than hierarchies of influence and power. So there are examples within the current economy, and there are things that we are doing now, but just as the medieval period could not possibly imagine what was coming, neither can we. We can form models and ideas which are accumulating and morphing and disseminating, which this is what we have to do. But we can't possibly have an idea of what's next. Mm-hmm. Just another thing, I had the privilege of being invited to a ceremony on December 21st, 2012, which was the end of the last 5,200-year cycle of the Mayan calendar and the beginning of the present one. And now this is totally intuitive and I have absolutely no evidence, but it seems to me that there's been a shift since then. Mm-hmm. Hearing more indigenous voices being respected, more women's voices, more youth voices. I don't think 10 years ago we could even be having this conversation. So I've just thrown these ideas out there. They're kind of all jumbled together, but I think there's some coherence in how they come together. So anyway, just throwing it out there.
Well, this has been a really rich conversation, and we're starting to get close to the end of the time. So I'm going to take a couple of more, but comments, and then leave a little bit of time at the end. But yeah, thanks, David, for bringing in, I think, the importance of not just ideas we extract from indigenous cultures, but bringing in indigenous peoples who have been stewarding resources and have the connections to landscapes and so forth. That sort of background is, that sort of history needs to be recognized. John.
Hi there. I'll constrict, due to the time constraints, I'll constrict what I was going to say. So we're building up a North European region, and what we're trying to do is keep together the various horizons, so 1, 2, and 3, and short circuit the connectivities between them, which are actually quite difficult to ever be able to see. So I think your mapping, Steve, is really phenomenal. One thing I'm trying to do with it is, you've mentioned two things in the two previous sessions, one of which sticks in my mind very strongly, which is about bringing flows into coherence. And the second one, where you mentioned about when you want to feed a tree, you don't push the nutrients into the root. You create the conditions around it in order to be able to, for the organism to be able to benefit from that. Now, when we're looking at infrastructures, as soon as you said that, we've been trying to push the nutrients into the infrastructures that we're looking at, one of which is energy sovereignty, to do with renewables and the like. We have a connected project to Westminster government. As soon as you said that, all of a sudden it completely blew open the whole potential as to how to look at solving that problem, what energy sovereignty can be. So rather than trying to push things into it, it's more about providing the context for it, as you quite wonderfully said. And I'm very eager to explore how the mapping approach that you have enables us to see with huge levels of complexity the way in which to provide that context rather than to try and push the nutrients into the infrastructure. In addition to which, I've always been very much into Stuart Brand's, he's in the Long Now Foundation, into his shearing layers of change. So in the landscape, there are different rates of change according to whether you're dealing with geology, culture, governance, etc. So that brings, if one applies that to each layer or element in the landscape, that's making it even more complicated by bringing these different differential rates of change to each of them that then have to relate to each other. So all of that context, all of a sudden, within what you're defining in your mapping platform, I'm wanting it to be that it enables us to be able to shine light onto every single stage of that process. And I'm wondering whether that's something we can touch base on.
Yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate you reaching out. Prior to this, I know that there's a conversation that you and I that wants to happen there. So we'll definitely touch base on that. And yeah, thank you for, I'm glad that resonated with you, that it was a flip for me when I thought, it's basically pull versus push. But when the metaphor hit me of, yeah, roots pull in what they need from a rich soil. You make those.
I'm also interested
the nutrients
in whether
are available, then they can pull it in, right? Don't push them into the roots.
Well, yeah. It's about the bringing coherence, flow into coherence, and I do wonder whether that's a core issue of the differences within our natural languages as well.
Yeah,
because English is object oriented. Irish on the West Coast, my background is the West Coast of Ireland. The Celtic languages are very much of that order, where you have a verb, you have a process, and you take part in the process, rather than the ego drive. And I understand that the Native American languages are not dissimilar. So it's almost as though your mapping enables an intermediary stage to be able to establish the patterns by which we access environment beyond the language that we particularly use, the Germanic languages, which constrain our options in the first place.
Cool. Thank you, John. I'm going to turn to Michael.
Oh, keep it very brief, Steve. Thank you. I know you're running out of time. Just one thing I wanted to add in to address many of the comments that have been made here about whether your system is safe from the existing system. In the time that I spent with Elizabeth Sartouris, she showed me that what is evolving is the level of cooperation. So there's a really good body of work called TIMN by David Runfeld that speaks about how we've evolved from tribes to institutions to markets to networks. And Elizabeth was telling me about how we're about to evolve into another form of collaboration, which requires the platforms like what you're developing. And many of those conversations were inspired, as you know, through the Scepter and Arthur Brock developments. So this evolution is going to take longer than our lifetimes. It's a multi-generational thing. And so we shouldn't be too concerned when we can't see evidence of it happening at the speed that we'd like it to happen. And it also doesn't matter if we don't understand it or recognize it. But I'm highly encouraged by what you're doing because it fully aligns with all those evolutionary woven in together with technology conversations that we had. So it's all spot on. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And as I mentioned to you, I take comfort in, I'm very clear. These are not my ideas. They're just moving through me, and I see them in the world, and that gives them validity because they're spontaneously emerging, right? It's not just some brain fart that I had someday. Yeah. All right, bring it home, brother Brian.
Okay. Boy, this conversation is so rich. But what the map means to me, I kind of want to fold my excitement about the map and my optimism about the map is the map allows us as a group to reconnect to the landscape. And I think that connection to the landscape has been incrementally severed through the 5,000 years of our material culture. And so by being able to capture stories, the map is one way to capture stories in my mind. By being able to capture stories of the landscape, each individual can become more intimately reconnected, not only with the landscapes, with the cultures on the landscapes, with the flora and the fauna on the landscapes, with the magic of the natural processes within the landscapes. We can individually reconnect with that and establish our own basis of coherence that is rooted in the very nature of the environment that we have been blessed to be incarnated in. But more importantly, then, is that those stories that connect us to the landscape can now inform our actions. And it is that informing of our actions that is going to make our work be different than what our society, what our species has been operating under for the last 5,000 years. And so we have established a coherence with the landscapes for our own healing and building a platform from which that coherence can inform our Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 activities. And so if there's a technology like the map where those stories can be captured and richly expressed, as you mentioned, Steve, it's not just words and it's not just chats, but it's also various forms of art in the weaving of that into wonderful stories that can ground and inspire and inform all of our actions in these three horizons. I think it's absolutely, it's a beautiful potential. And, it kind of becomes not only that coherence, but these stories, this connection to landscape, the stories that the landscapes themselves are telling through us, gives us, I think what Melanie Carlin once said, this is a Trojan horse of love. It's a love of life. It's a love of the universe. And if this platform can realize this, where we can share it worldwide amongst each other, amongst ourselves, amongst all of society, then that's what makes me real excited about the map. So that's my bit. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Thanks, man. Yeah, beautiful. Well, I think you brought it home really well there, Brian. Yeah. Well said. Well said. I share that enthusiasm. So I'd like at this point to thank everybody for such a rich conversation. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to have even more people chime in, but feel free to chime in on the chat, reach out to me individually. I would like to tee up what's happening in the next couple of sessions, though. So to do that, I'm going to come back here. I said couple of sessions. I should mean one session. There's one more session in this series, and then the real fun begins. So in session 2, I promised that though I, had to acknowledge the map is still in proof of concept, and I can't demo it, and there's nothing for you to use, that I would give you an incremental path to map adoption, one that you can start right now. And so that's going to be the focus of session 4, which is an adjacent possible path forward for all of us. And that path will help accelerate bioregional mapping efforts now. You don't have to wait for the map. You can start right now. It starts to bring coherent tech to building coherent bioregional stories, and it will provide an on-ramp to the map when the map is ready to further enhance the coherence and agency of bioregions. So I'm going to give you a little teaser here, and I have Wenya McLean and Vincent Arena, I think, on the call. They're going to be the stars of the next session, but that's going to be positioned in terms of 3 invitations. And these are going to be bioregionally focused. So we're imagining a plethora of possible bioregional mapping projects in various stages of gestation. And the first invitation is going to be an invitation to accelerate your bioregional mapping via something called the Omni framework. And this framework provides a methodology and a process that helps you figure out what is the bioregional story that really needs to be told. What is your story, right? There's lots of dimensions that I went through, and I left out many of what a bioregional story could be. But what is the story that really wants to be told now? Who's it for? What's its scope? What's its objectives? Who's going to participate in it? What kinds of protections do we need around the information about the bioregion? So all of, sort of helping you think through all of those things is what the Omni framework can do. And so we invite some of projects. Again, this is an invitation. We're putting these nutrients into the soil and not pushing them at you, but feel free to pull these into your bioregion, the Omni mapping framework. And if it doesn't fit for your maturity or just don't vibe with that story, that's okay too. There's lots of different approaches. We need lots of experimentation, as we said. So it's okay if you go a different route. For those that come through the framework, we think this can be the seeds of a bioregional mapping guild that is starting to build the expertise in the various roles, and there's quite a few of them, that build the expertise to do bioregional mapping well. So we'll grow our capacity to do that by building the expertise within the Bioregional Mapping Guild, and that in turn will improve both the velocity and the quality of the maps that are produced. So this is a chance to collaborate, to cooperate in the production of autonomous bioregional stories. So it's still your story to tell, your bioregional story to tell, but we're collaborating on methodology where it makes sense and helping to, sort of shorten the learning curve, if you will, so that people can get through it quickly. Another part, the final sort of aspect of the Omni mapping framework is to help you decide the right tech stack in support of what the story is that you're trying to tell. And so there's lots, as we saw, I think in the first session, I did a little question on the chat where I asked you to just sort of chime in with, well, what technology are you using beyond the ones that I had described there? And so there's lots of choices. Sometimes we don't think about the full range of choices, but this is kind of the enterprise architecture hat. It's kind of looking at it and say, okay, this is the technology portfolio. What's the right fit for us? And so the second part of the final part of the Omni mapping framework looks at what the requirements of the story that you determined you need to tell, what that might lead you towards in terms of effective tech support. So some may choose WordPress ecosystem. I know that's very strong in Regenerate Cascadia. There's a whole ecosystem around WordPress that might be a good fit. Others might find Hilo a fit, Mighty Networks, some combination of Zoom, Airtable, and so forth. But this is also where the second invitation comes in of the 3, which is, if it makes sense, based on your requirements and your inclination, to express, manage, and share your maps in the Catalyst 2.5 ecosystem. And Catalyst, for those not familiar, it brings a coherent tech stack specifically focused on mapping, and it pre-integrates technologies like Airtable, Kumu, Miro, something called Catamark. So we invite some projects to use Catalyst if it makes sense. And for those that do that, in parallel with what's happening with the mapping efforts, is Vincent Arena's team. And Vincent is the developer of Catalyst, and also, along with Wendy McLean, also in this call, the developers of the Omni Mapping Framework. I'm excited that Vincent and I have been finding lots of commonality in both values and skills that are complementary, and also timeframes are aligning and so forth, it seems to be. So that I'm very focused on integrating with Catalyst and making the first incarnation of the map Catalyst 3.0. So basically, Catalyst 2.5 is available today. Vincent and I are working on bringing Catalyst 3.0 to life based on the map. And so for those that are on the Catalyst 2.5 ecosystem, this will provide an on-ramp to the map ecosystem. So if you like the way that the map story unfolded and you're looking for a path to get on there, we're going to smooth that migration path so that it'll be very easy for you to just sort of move seamlessly into Catalyst 3.0 on the map. So that's the invitations we're making. And so in session 4, I'm happy to have Vincent and Wendy lead that discussion. So we're positioned now to enough talk, let's go after it. So we'll get presentations, demos, and discussion. So if you don't know what the Omni Mapping Framework is, no worries. That's what we'll share in session 4, and also live demos of Catalyst 2.5 and demonstrate how a map can actually be represented within Catalyst. So that's it. Hope to see you all join us at session 4. Any final shouts out before we close? Or Vincent or Wendy, actually, before we do that, let me give you, either one of you, a chance to chime in and say anything more about what you'd like to say about session 4.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Steve. It's easy to follow you because you're always so clear and concise. I'm thrilled by the conversation today. I've written down so many notes. I feel like this group of people in the design school, and especially, is really aimed at that ability to hold the larger picture while also tackling the details that are on the ground. And that's really what we're being called to do now. So the reason why I work on Omni Mapping and why I work on Catalyst is because it's, for me, the tool that is enabling us to do that, see the bigger picture if we need to see the bigger picture, and see down on the ground if we need to see down on the ground. And so Omni, now that our mapping has gotten more complex, we now need Omni Mapping as a process to help us strategize and think about how we want to organize the information before we enter our mapping tools. And again, not everybody needs the same mapping tools. So having this process is helping people to strategize how they want to approach their mapping so that it serves them, it serves their organization, it serves the people who are using it, makes the maps more useful. And hopefully we'll finally get to a place where the maps are more shareable. That's really what I'm hearing in all the spaces that I'm in, is this sovereignty and the decentralization and the sharing of ideas, and this interconnection and interrelationship needs this new infrastructure. And so really we're just trying to have the conversations that help build that infrastructure to support everyone's efforts. Thank you. I'll pass to, and I'm excited to bring that and have more discussion. Pass it to Vincent if he's in a place where he can talk.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm excited for session 4. I'm not going to add too much more right now, but I definitely, before we close, I would love to know, a question from folks here in the group is, what are you currently focused on mapping? Like what systems are on the leading edge of your efforts? And I think knowing that might help us tailor that session a bit more to be practical to you. And I think Steve has done a really great job at really paving this vision for something in Horizon 3 that I think can be very transformational. And what we're trying to do in the next session is provide a tangible place to start. And so I feel like that's a really exciting opportunity and like intersection in this work is, how do we get started now while also building towards the longer term strategy that we know is going to be omni-win, to put it that way.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. So I'd reinforce that ask if in the comments on the recording, we'll get this session recorded, posted soon. If you can add clarity on anything you can offer on what map is wanting to be built in your space of the world, from your perspective, that would be really helpful. We can, Vincent's a master at tailoring conversations to the audience, right? So the more he knows about what it is you're trying to do going in, the more effective that can be. So I encourage that as well. Carrie and Tobias, did you want to come in again?
I just had a quick question, Steve.
Sure.
I'm so glad to see you, Vincent and Wendy, and glad you're collaborating. I think I am losing the plot a little bit because, and I knew this was going to happen starting in session 1 when you talked about MAP, which is an acronym for something that refers to what you're building and what you envision, and then mapping that I think I hear you talking about now. And so I'm just curious about how does this collaboration in session 4 relate to, for example, work that Brendan has been doing here in the design school around mapping, which I haven't participated in, and or how does it connect to the work that's happening over in the BioFi community with the mapping exercise that Tyler's doing? Help me get clear on that.
Great, thank you for that question. Because it can be the map, the mimetic activation platform, and mapping as an exercise, and building maps, it can all get confusing. But the mapping that we're talking about is bioregional mapping, the way it's talked about in the design school, and very much aligned with what Brendan and Claire are doing. And this maybe also gets back at the question Michael helped ask towards the beginning, which is why the focus on the Earth Regeneration Fund. We are seeing bioregional mapping pop as something that people are feeling important, calling for them, right? So we see it in the BioFi community, we see it in the design school, we see it in Pivot Earth, we see it in other places as well. And so we're trying to, I have this, one of my mottos as in my professional career was think globally, act opportunistically. So I need to have the big picture. I need to sort of see the vision of what we're trying to build, but then I look for things that have energy behind them, things that already want to emerge. And then the idea is if we can make that successful, those things, if we can feed and make those successful, and as a byproduct of that, flesh out some of the bigger picture, then that's how we can get a virtual spiral going. And so I think plugging into when I refer to the plethora of bioregional mapping projects, that's exactly what I'm talking about, or those projects that people already feel called to do, right? They can take very many different forms. Understanding and bringing that into clarity, into concreteness, that's what Omni mapping does. And then being able to share those maps, manage those maps, express those maps in technology, that's what Catalyst does, along with other technologies. So that's the thread, I think. And just to clarify, there's no requirement if you use the Omni mapping framework that you're not committed to Catalyst at that time. As I mentioned, that final step of decide your tech stack. If it doesn't fit, I'm not going to push you into something that doesn't fit. And similarly, you end up on Catalyst 2.5, of course, there's no requirement that you migrate to Catalyst 3.0 when we have it running on the map. We're just offering those nutrients into the soil as an option for you. Did that help? That was a great question. And Tobias. Yes, thank you, Karen.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for all of what you have shared so far. It's been really wonderful to follow along. My question, if I can just be direct with it, I've got it written down, so I'll just read it out.
Go for it.
It's, could you expand on the implicit Web3 thinking and the holochain implementation? And a follow on from that, if those 18,000 lines of Rust code could speak, what would they say?
Yeah, they would say, we're lonely, we need more. Yeah, the question about the relationship to Web3, that's probably a longer conversation that I could really get into now. Maybe that's something we could take offline. I think there is a connection. There are multiple connections, and the Web3 is not one big thing either. The only thing I would say in general is that the map is not blockchain based. Holochain is not a blockchain. And there's architectural reasons why that's important, related to sovereignty, related to scalability. But interoperability is a key part of the map to multiple ecosystems, including the Web3 ecosystem. So I know that's an unsatisfactory answer, but let's connect offline and we can go as deep as you want on that, okay? All right. Well, thank you again once to everyone who joined, and such a lively conversation, and hope you'll join us for session 4. And I just look forward to co-creating this thriving world that honors all life and that we can all contribute to and be a part of. That's that's the positive attractor that I think is pulling us forward. And with that, we'll bring it to a close. Thanks again.
Thanks, Steve.